hablo, hablé, hablaba, voy a hablar. If you just learned these 4 simple ideas in Spanish, you'll be able to speak in the past, present, and future. If you just watch this video until the end, you'll know all the tenses you need that make up 80% of daily conversations in Spanish. First, we'll take a look at the present indicative, then at the preterite, then the imperfect, and then at the very simple formula of ir plus a plus infinitive. I promise you, if you just watch this video until the end, you are going to be able to speak in the past, present, and future. Of course, we are omitting certain tenses and moods. However, these are arguably the most important things to know in the entire language. Also, if you feel nervous and unconfident when speaking Spanish, if you freeze up and you feel embarrassed, check out the free 7-day course I have on my website, SpanishLink.com. You can get free access to it by clicking the link in the video description. First, let's take a look at the present indicative. Now, the indicative is a mood, okay? So there are 3 different moods in Spanish: the indicative, the imperative, and the subjunctive, which typically trips up students. In today's video, we're only going to be taking a look at the indicative mood. So moods can be in different tenses, and in this case, we're taking a look at the present tense indicative. Now, in Spanish, we have 3 different kinds of infinitive verbs. Now, an infinitive verb is basically the pure form of the verb. It is when a verb has not been conjugated out of its infinitive form. So we have AR, ER, and IR verbs. The awesome thing about Spanish is that you just have to learn the conjugation rules. You can also call them patterns or formulas. And once you learn these formulas, then you'll instantly know how to conjugate any new verb that you learn. Of course, we also have some irregular verbs in Spanish which follow irregular conjugation patterns, and we'll take a look at those in a second. So let's take a look at the conjugation patterns for regular AR verbs. We have o, as, a, amos, an. Now, in this video, we won't be taking a look at vosotros as it's only used in Spain. Now, there's a simple song that you can sing in order to memorize this chart. O, as, a, amos, an. Otra vez. O, as, a, amos, an. Otra vez. So now, once we've studied and mastered this verb conjugation chart, we can learn any regular AR verb and instantly conjugate it into the present indicative. So the verb hablar. Yo hablo. Tú hablas. Él, ella, usted habla. Nosotros hablamos. Ellos, ellas, ustedes hablan. Conjugating is super simple. All we do is cut off the verb ending, so either AR, ER, or IR, and then we add on the new ending according to the rule. So if I want to say I speak, I'll cut off the AR ending and I'll add on the new ending according to the rule, which would be O. Therefore, yo hablo. Now, it's very important to learn these conjugation charts because many times native speakers will not use the subject pronouns. They will not say yo or tú or él. They will just say hablo, hablas, habla. That's why context in Spanish is very important. Now let's take a look at ER verb conjugation patterns. We have o, es, hemos, en. O, es, hemos, en. It is really that simple. And I promise you, if you just master these conjugation charts, you will be able to confidently speak in the present tense. And by the end of this video, if you watch it and you study these conjugation charts, you will know how to speak confidently in the past, present, and future. So if we take a look at the regular ER verb, comer, we would have yo como, tú comes, él, ella, usted come, nosotros comemos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comen. It is really that simple. And finally, for IR verbs, we have o, es, imos, en. O, es, imos, en. Notice how it's very similar to the ER verbs, except in the nosotros form, it's imos instead of hemos. So if we take a look at the verb vivir, we will have yo vivo, tú vives, él, ella, usted vive, nosotros vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes viven. Now, you might be thinking, Nate, this is awesome. However, what really trips me up are the irregular verbs in Spanish, because irregular verbs, while they are commonly used, follow irregular conjugation patterns. They don't follow the regular conjugation rules. So what do we have to do? We simply have to memorize them. Now, there are some tips and tricks, but we're not going to have enough time in this video. However, I will tell you the 13 most commonly used verbs that are irregular. Ser, haber, estar, tener, hacer, poder, decir, ir, ver, dar, saber, querer, and llegar. Now, I'm going to put a link to an awesome website that has all the irregular verb conjugations so you can check those out and study them. So now that we've learned about the present indicative tense, you can speak in the present tense. Let's say we learn the new AR verb, tocar, meaning to touch or to play. Let's say I want to say, I play the guitar. How would I say that? Okay, we have the AR verb, tocar. We cut off the AR ending. We add on the new ending according to the rule, which for the yo person would be o. Yo toco la guitarra. It is really that simple. It is just following the patterns. Now, something to note about the present tense in Spanish is that we can also use it as the idea of the ing verbs in English. So instead of saying estoy yendo al parque, we can just say voy al parque. I go to the park, or I am going to the park. So anything that is happening in the near future, we can use the present indicative tense to behave as that kind of ing verb in English. Voy al parque. I am going to the park. Like I said earlier, that's why context is so important in Spanish, because voy al parque could mean I go to the park or I am going to the park. It just depends on the context. Another popular way to use the present indicative in Spanish is when we order food. Now, here in Mexico, it's very normal for us to say, me da unos tacos, por favor. We will say, me da or me das, literally meaning you give me. But it's a very normal way to order here. We could also say something like, quiero. However, be careful. Do not say, puedo tener. We never say this in ordering in Spanish. We would just say, quiero or me da. Okay, now that we've learned about the present indicative, let's take a look at the preterite tense in Spanish, which the preterite and the imperfect are arguably the two hardest tenses for us to master as Spanish learners. Now, if there's one thing that you're going to remember from this video, let it be this. Pay attention, listen close. The preterite is for one-time actions in the past, and the imperfect is for ongoing actions in the past. The preterite is for one-time actions in the past. The imperfect is for ongoing actions in the past. For example, yo fui, I went, that's preterite, happened once, or yo iba, I was going, or I used to go, or I would go. Now, the imperfect can be tricky because it can take on many different kinds of translations depending on the context of the sentence. And we'll take a look at a few examples in a second. First, let's take a look at the regular conjugation patterns for the preterite tense. So for AR verbs, we have haste, o, amos, and aron. So if we use our regular AR verb hablar, we would say hablé, hablaste, habló, hablamos, hablaron. Now, be careful with the él, ella, usted form. It's habló, not hablo, habló. Because remember, in the present tense, if I say hablo, it means I speak. Whereas if I want to say él habló, I need to put the emphasis on that o at the end. In Spanish, the natural emphasis on a word falls on the second to last vowel. So in the word hablo, when there's no accent on it, then the natural emphasis is on the second to last vowel, which in that case would be hablo, versus habló. Now, the great thing is that in the preterite tense, regular ER and IR verbs follow the same conjugation patterns. So we have iste, io, imos, and ieron. So an ER verb could be comer, yo comí, tú comiste, él, ella, usted comió, nosotros comimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comieron. Or an IR verb like vivir, yo viví, tú viviste, él, ella, usted vivió, nosotros vivimos, ellos, ellas, ustedes vivieron. Like I said, it is really that simple. All you do is cut off the ending, AR, ER, or IR, and you add the new ending according to the rule. I promise you, if you just study these conjugation charts, you will be able to speak Spanish in the past, present, and future tense. Also, did you notice that in the nosotros form for AR verbs, it's also amos? So, nosotros hablamos could mean we speak or we spoke. Like I've been saying, that's why context is so important. For example, siempre hablamos los domingos. We always talk or speak on Sundays. Versus ayer nos hablamos. Yesterday we spoke to each other. Ayer is that trigger phrase letting us know, hey, you're going to use the preterite. Now, there are many verbs that follow irregular conjugations in the preterite tense. However, the four most common ones are ser, ir, ver, and dar. So ser and ir in the preterite tense are actually the exact same. Yo fui would be I went or I was. Now, what I always tell my students is that it's very rare that we'll use yo fui in the ser form. Anytime you hear something like fui, fuiste, fue, it's almost always going to be the verb ir, meaning to go. So yo fui, I went, tú fuiste, you went, and so on. So can you remind me, when do we use the preterite? For one-time actions in the past, and we use the imperfect for ongoing actions in the past, which we'll take a look at in a second. Now, there are many different acronyms online that will try and tell you, oh, use it when you're feeling emotions or opinions or things like this. However, I find this to be confusing and difficult to remember during real life conversations. That's why I tell you, if you're going to remember one thing from this video, let it be this. Preterite for one-time actions in the past, the imperfect for ongoing actions in the past. For example, yo compré un coche nuevo. I bought a new car. This is a one-time action. I wasn't buying a car. I didn't used to buy a car. I bought a car. That's a preterite. Yo compré un coche nuevo. Vivió en Perú por 3 meses. He lived in Peru for 3 months. Now, we'll use the preterite for specific time periods. So, 3 meses is a specific time. Even though we could argue it was a thing that kept going on, because it's specific, we will use the preterite. Vivió en Perú por 3 meses. Now, you could say vivió en Perú, and that's it. And you could say vivía en Perú, which would be the imperfect. The meaning just changes and the context changes. Vivió en Perú. He lived in Peru. Whereas if we said vivía en Perú, it would mean he used to live in Peru. It's subtle, but it is an important difference. Me levanté, me vestí y salí para la fiesta. So I got up, I got dressed, and I left for the party. These are all one-time actions. I got up, I got dressed, I left, right? It's not I was leaving, I wasn't getting dressed, I got dressed, right? That's, like I said, the most important thing to remember. Preterite, one-time actions in the past, imperfect, ongoing actions in the past. Okay, so now let's take a look at the imperfect tense. For AR verbs, we have haba, habas, haba, habamos, haban. Kind of sounds like we're Yoda, okay? For example, with the AR verb hablar, yo hablaba, tú hablabas, él, ella, usted hablaba, nosotros hablábamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes hablaban. Like I said, it is really that simple. For any regular verb, now you will be able to conjugate not only in the past, not only in the present, but we are also going to learn about the future. It is really that simple. It is just following formulas. And just like in the preterite tense, the great thing is that in the imperfect tense, for any regular ER or IR verb, they will have the same verb endings. So, for example, ia, ias, ia, íamos, and ian. Okay? So, an ER verb like comer, yo comía, tú comías, él, ella, usted comía, nosotros comíamos, ellos, ellas, ustedes comían. Okay? Or a verb like vivir, IR, vivía, vivías, vivía, vivíamos, vivían. It is just following the pattern. That is really all there is to it. And the great news is that in the imperfect tense, there are only 3 irregulars. Ir, ser, and ver. So we would have something like yo iba, tú ibas, él iba, nosotros íbamos, ellos iban. Yo era, tú eras, él era, nosotros éramos, ellos eran. And finally, yo veía, tú veías, él veía, nosotros veíamos, ellos veían. Now remember, preterite, one-time actions in the past. Imperfect, ongoing actions in the past. For example, almorzábamos juntos cada día. We would eat lunch together each day or every day. Now, that little phrase, cada día, lets us know, all right, this is something that is ongoing. Think about what you're trying to say in English. Okay, do I want to say I was doing this or do I want to say I did this? That's very important, okay? One-time actions versus ongoing actions. Now, it is super common to use the imperfect along with the preterite in the same sentence. For example, iba a mi clase cuando sonó el teléfono. So I was going to class when, boom, interrupts it, the phone rang. The phone was not ringing. It didn't used to ring. It rang. Whereas the imperfect, I was going to class. Mi papá cocinaba cuando entré a casa. My dad was cooking when I entered the house. I wasn't entering the house. I didn't used to enter the house. I entered. That's the preterite. Whereas he was cooking. That's ongoing action in the past. Now, be careful when translating imperfect verbs into English because sometimes they can take on the translation of would. So, for example, hacíamos eso todo el tiempo. We would do that all the time. You could also translate this as we used to do this all the time. Now, I prefer that you use the translation of used to because when you use a translation would, it's very common that students will mix up the conditional tense with the imperfect tense. So instead of students saying hacíamos eso todo el tiempo, students will say haríamos eso todo el tiempo, which is incorrect if you're trying to speak in the past tense. So, oh, we would do that all the time. We used to do that all the time. Whereas the conditional would be, oh, we would do that, but, and there's a condition. So be careful. Try to use the translation of used to instead of would when using the imperfect. We'll also use the imperfect for times and dates. So for example, eran las 3 de la tarde. It was 3 in the afternoon. Remember that we're saying eran las 3, which is plural, so we'll say eran instead of era. Eran las 3 de la tarde. We'll also use the imperfect for age. For example, la niña tenía 4 años. The girl was 4 years old and she continued having 4 years old. Okay, we're almost done. The last thing we're going to take a look at is the very easy formula ir plus a plus infinitive, which we can use to talk about the future instantly. It is really this easy. All we need to do is conjugate the verb ir. We'll typically use it in the present indicative tense. So, yo voy, tú vas, él va, nosotros vamos, ellos van. Then we'll add the word a, meaning to, and then we'll add an infinitive verb. So, hablar, comer, vivir. For example, voy a comer. I am going to eat. Voy a vivir. I am going to live. Vas a bailar. You are going to dance. It is really that easy. If you just learn that, you'll be able to speak in the future tense. You can also use this formula to talk about things that you were going to do. For example, iba a comer, pero blah, blah, blah. I was going to eat, but. Ibas a bailar, pero blah, blah, blah. You were going to dance, but. It is really that simple. If you just learn voy, vas, va, vamos, van, then you add a, and you add any infinitive verb you want, you can speak in the future tense. Bueno, I know this has been a lot of information, but if you watched all the way to the end, felicidades, because now you can speak in the past, present, and future tense. Of course, we did not learn all the tenses or moods in Spanish today, but these are arguably the most important things to know so that you can have 80% of the conversations that you want to be having in Spanish. Muchas gracias por ver el video. If you'd like to learn with me for free on my website, you can go to SpanishWithNate.com and you can click the link in the video description to join my free 7-day course. Gracias. Adios.